Based on Quran and Hadith, Islamic art tends to avoid images, and I can say without hesitation that there, to my knowledge, has never been an image made of Allah. As we take a look at the top row of images, you can see that other faiths, many other faiths, commonly depict religious figures, figures of divine beings, gods, saints, and going from let's start at the left, that is an image of Buddha. I think you can recognize that. That is the greater vehicle, so it is Buddha as a divine being. Next to him, I think everyone recognizes Jesus. And then in the very center, that is the great god Shiva in his dance of destruction. Then we have a version of Apollo coming out of the Greco Roman world. And last on the far right is an image of the great mother goddess of the Aztecs. These are some among many cultures that produce images of their deities. For Islam, however, you will never ever find a depiction of Allah. If you look at the bottom section, I have two images below. Both of these are as close as you could ever get to a depiction of Allah. And what they are written forms of the name Allah, which is Arabic for God. Why do Muslims avoid depictions of Allah? Well, for a number of reasons. One is they think that really there is no way to depict him because we can't understand his essence, what he looks like. We don't know his appearance. He is, in some sense, then unknowable. It is also arrogant, Muslims believe, to create images, particularly of Allah, whom we cannot know, because God is the only creator, so we shouldn't try and do it. Consequently, there tends to be avoidance of depictions of human forms and life forms within Islam. I'm not going to say that they never occur because they do. What I can say is that you will never find a depiction of Allah or any figure associated with religion within Islam. That generally speaking applies to the Prophet Muhammad, although there are times historically in history when the Prophet Muhammad was depicted, sometimes wearing a veil so you could not see his face out of respect. So, what is the source for the aversion to images in Islam? It is in the Quran, and that is Surah 5, section 90, lines 90 essentially of that particular chapter or surah. And it goes something like this: Believers, wine and gambling, idols and divination arrows are abominations from the work of Satan. Avoid them in order that you prosper. So, as Muslims, this is what we're being told to do. We're being told not to drink. The wine is, I'm going to say, in a sense, all inclusive for alcohol. So, we're not supposed to drink. And gambling, we're not supposed to gamble. We're not supposed to worship idols. And we're not supposed to engage in divining arrows. Okay, what does this mean? Well, the divining arrows means telling the future, and it is fortune telling essentially. And many religions resist fortune telling because, for the same reason that Muslims do, the future, the knowing of the future, is left to Allah. The part about idols is the difficult part because it is a warning, just as we have really, I think, in the Ten Commandments, not to worship images. But conservative interpretations of this within Islam have led Muslims to carry it over to dictate that we should not make depictions, certainly of Allah, never, never, ever of Allah, but also of other life forms. So, Muslim decorations in holy sites, for example, in particular, tend to avoid human forms, animal forms, life forms. You will find them, however, in private palaces and manuscripts where it is not a religious context. So, what I am saying is, in the world of religion, in the Muslim world, you will not find images of life forms. But in the private or secular context, you may indeed still see them. Okay, what else do we have? Well, gambling, that's not allowed. And the reason for that is a relatively practical one. You might lose money, and that would harm your family. Last, wine, which does really mean all alcoholic beverages in this case. And, well, what is wrong with that? Well, if you have to pray, as we'll see shortly, if you have to pray 5 times a day, it's going to be very, very difficult to consume wine and have a clear head for prayer. In general, the objection then is to the clarity of your vision, of your understanding, which wine might cloud. Based on everything we know so far, then, what can we say about Islamic aesthetics? Well, one, writing is the highest art form. First of all, writing is not going to endanger us in terms of creating life forms. It is, however, going to honor the Word of God and become a very rich form of artistic expression in the Muslim world. Second, images, when they're present, and I've already indicated there are images that exist in Islam, they tend towards abstraction. They're rarely religious. Okay, they tend to be secular in nature, and they may cover diverse surfaces, which we might describe in the West as minor arts. Okay, first of all, the tendency towards abstraction removes the challenge that an artist is competing with Allah as a creator. And that is one of the dangers that is associated with making art in terms of the Muslim world. The artist, by making images, is taking on the role of God. So any images that are made must not resemble the real thing. And abstraction, therefore, saves the artist from that destiny or that downfall. Okay, we're going to make them also rarely of religious subjects. We're going to make them in the secular arena. Perhaps of historical figures, that would be satisfactory, or perhaps of mythological subjects, perhaps of animals. Many of these images, and these are abstract images that I'm talking about now, are going to cover diverse surfaces because they're highly decorative. So, for example, if we go across the bottom row, we have a plate, we have a candle holder, we have a glass lamp, and we have another plate. These are all places where Islamic decoration can find a home, just as it could be placed upon a carpet or a helmet of a warrior, which is pretty much in the center of my screen, or the garment that the woman is displaying in a fashion show, or on the flag up above at the top. This happens to be the Saudi flag. Islamic artistic expression often then adorns the surfaces of everyday objects, and that would include plates and candlestick holders and lamps, just for example. We in the West have come to refer to these objects as minor arts. Again, this is a kind of bias from a Western perspective, which elevates painting and sculpture and also architecture. But in the Muslim world, anything can become the surface on which one can create. The elements of style for these artistic creations may include symmetry, and I think perhaps you can find that in a number of these objects. Look at the costume of the woman in the upper right, for example. Balance, harmony, rhythm, and pleasing placement against the ground or the background on which the Islamic drawing or painting or decoration is placed. Also, Islamic aesthetics often embrace geometry and arabesque designs. The term arabesque is a Western designation to describe abstract, usually floral, perhaps geometric, but abstract decorative forms which richly fill the surfaces of objects. Taking it a notch further, the eye dazzlers that Muslim artists create, which are incredibly complex designs. Mr. O'Reilly talks about these, and we'll look at one or two of them. In Islamic aesthetics, you may also encounter paired opposition. And you can certainly see that in the garment that the woman is wearing, top right. It's very symmetrical with two halves, essentially, of the dress being richly decorated in, I think it's gold thread on the surface. This is a reflection of the writing style that we find in the Quran, which often creates paired opposition. The paired opposition in the Quran also adds to a quality of rhythm in the writing. We often find in the Quran oppositions that occur, for example, a contrast of paradise and hell, a contrast of believers and non believers, a contrast of men and women, a contrast of good deeds and bad deeds, a contrast of life here and the life beyond. The Quran itself is often written in such a way to draw comparisons or contrasts which have a rhythmic, pleasing quality to the ear within the writing, but that also seems to be picked up in the art style. Rhythm in writing functions fairly similarly to the way in which rhythm in art does, and that would include repeated shapes and forms, or in the case of writing, perhaps sounds or words. This slide is a kind of summary that will help to remind us of exactly why writing is the highest art form within Islam. The first is that there really was a very, very strong narrative oral tradition among the nomadic, and I've got to stress that, desert Bedouins, folks who didn't have a lot of possessions to carry from place to place, who didn't necessarily write things down, but they relied instead on poetry, often passionate poetry, especially odes, for stories of the bravery of the men who were part of their clans, and also often stories, odes, poetry of love. The odes were meant to be recited and perhaps to be sung. And when you listen to the Quran, there is a very rhythmic quality to it. It is beautiful, like poetry. Okay, the second point, with the arrival of Islam, the recitations, which become the foundation of the Quran, that's what the Quran is, the recitations that come from the angel Gabriel from God to the Prophet Muhammad. They are passed orally to the Prophet Muhammad, who's instructed to listen to them, remember them, and then recite and make sure that they're written down. And three, because the Quran is the written word of God, writing is also sacred and became the highest art form. That doesn't mean you can't be creative. Everything on this page is a written, I'm going to call them paintings, in fact, is written paintings or depictions of the Bismillah. The Bismillah, again, is the first line of the first surah of the Quran. That goes, in the name of God, the compassionate, the caring. This is a reminder, again, that this is an important expression used within the Muslim world, and it is truly a part of daily life. But look at the different ways that you can write this in Arabic and also turn it into artistic forms. God's name is often used in daily language, unlike the West, not just in the Bismillah, but also in the expression inshallah, which is commonly used to mean God willing. I'll see you on Thursday, inshallah, if God wills it.